So Hurricane Katrina is one of the most well-known natural disasters in U.S. history, yet few know what really happened in New Orleans in 2005. The aim of this speech is to provide education about Hurricane Katrina, the circumstances that created the perfect storm for immense destruction. I have a connection to this because one day I was scrolling on TikTok and I came across the page of a Hurricane Katrina survivor, and she wasn't too much older than myself, and she was sharing how she was so scared to evacuate but didn't really have a choice, and how she was nervous about what she'd come back to, if anything. So when her family came back, they had lost everything. Their house was in ruins, the water had completely destroyed everything they owned in their home, which was not an uncommon phenomenon for people who had been in New Orleans at the time. So hearing her story made me want to understand the full impact of Katrina, along with why the devastation was so concentrated, in a sense, in the city of New Orleans. New Orleans has had a significance in this country for hundreds of years, seeing as it's on the water, and so it serves as a great port for import and export. However, its population peak was in the 1960s, and that has steadily been on a decline due to a lack of technological advancement and gainful employment. The only thing that was kind of keeping people there and drawing people there was the access to not free but kind of cheap housing. So according to PBS, the storm caused over $100 billion in property damage. 30,000 people were forced to take shelter at the Superdome, where conditions increasingly became worse. In response, thousands were bused to surrounding states like Texas, where they were met with complete strangers or had to live with distant family or friends of family, hoping for shelter when they got there. FEMA did not put aid on the ground for close to a week, and with conditions where there was a storm surge of up to 28 feet of water, winds are over 175 miles per hour, you can only imagine the amount of devastation that was really rampant through the city. So making the dire situation worse, this is how we ended up with have you all seen the photos or videos of people who were on their roofs begging for help, or putting holes in their attics and trying to get to the roof so that they could wave to the helicopters or just be seen? That was because there was no aid in the city, and only helicopters were kind of flying around picking up specific people, and others were left kind of fend for themselves. Once waters had receded and it was more safe to be able to make moves and try to look for help and look for resources, people wanted to know why New Orleans was hit as hard as it was, because the hurricane had also hit surrounding states like Mississippi, Alabama. However, the bulk of the devastation was concentrated in New Orleans, and this was because of the levee failure. So levees are man-made boundaries or barriers that keep water outside of city limits. So, New Orleans was hit the hardest. In her words, whispered in water by Sandy Rosenthal, the Army Corps of Engineers, which is a portion of the U.S. government that kind of constructs the things that we use every day. So our highways, our parking, and things like that. So they were found responsible for the destruction that happened in New Orleans because they had not properly repaired levees from 1965 when there was a hurricane in that city. So there was a hurricane called Hurricane Betsy, which completely destroyed the Lower Ninth Ward, where a lot of black people lived in the city. And from that point on, only minor repairs had been made. However, they did not completely fix the levees, nor did they do repairs that would have prevented the devastation that we saw in Katrina in New Orleans. Through Sandy Rosenthal's civil investigation, she found that the levees in New Orleans had not been properly repaired, leaving the city and its people in danger. This led to a public outcry for the Army Corps of Engineers to take responsibility and contribute to the rebuilding of the city of New Orleans, seeing as it was their engineering failures that had created so much devastation for so many people who weren't able to either get their lives back or get it back on track. And to this day, so many people are still displaced from New Orleans because there has not been a proper rebuild of the city. Prior to the 2005 hurricane, New Orleans had already been in economic decline, And this was written about by Jacob Victor. He's a professor, and also he works or published the Journal of Economic Perspectives, which lets us know how New Orleans, due to the lack of technological advancement and gainful employment, had been losing its economic draw, and that Hurricane Katrina further contributed to that decline by not having, of course, everything's flooded, so there are no jobs. The first responders can't come out, nothing is opening, of course, and then just period, the land was devastated because New Orleans and its surrounding areas are what's called marshes and swampland, so a lot of it, the word I'm looking for has lost me. A lot of it was completely destroyed. And so this led to people looking for answers, and rightfully so. So in conclusion, the Army Corps of Engineers was responsible for the devastation that we saw in 2005 with Hurricane Katrina in the city of New Orleans. And a lot of people suffered during this storm.